Friends, as we continue our sermon series called The Gospel According to Dr. Seuss, I would remind you that if you missed last week's message, you can see it again. It is available to you through our website, which there's a link up in the upper right-hand corner to our YouTube channel, and there you can find that particular sermon as well as other past sermons. Or you can also go to our Facebook page, and because we do Facebook Live during our 11 o'clock service, so you're welcome to take a look at it there. So in addition to the reading from Ezekiel that Melanie offered for us today, I am reading from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul's words to the church in Corinth, starting with verse 19. Although I'm free from all people, I make myself a slave to all people, to recruit more of them. I act like a Jew to the Jews so I can recruit Jews. I act like I'm under the law to those under the law so I can recruit those who are under the law, though I myself am not under the law. I act like I'm outside the law to those who are outside the law so I can recruit those outside the law, though I'm not outside the law of God, but rather under the law of Christ. I act weak to the weak so I can recruit the weak. I have become all things to all people so I could save some by possible means. All the things I do are for the sake of the gospel so I can be a partner with it. May God add wisdom to the reading, hearing, and understanding of these words. We all have things we don't like, don't we? Yeah, what are some of the things that you don't like? Go ahead, shout them out. Asparagus. I heard something about a doctor. Doctor's offices. Wild okra? Oh, boiled okra. That sounds awful. Beets? Oh, heat. I heard beets because I don't like beets, but heat, yes. Yeah. Cleaning the house. You and me are sisters, darling, when it comes to that. What else? Well, some of the things that you mentioned are things that I don't like either. Some of us don't like certain foods. We don't like certain tasks like cleaning toilets, or certain activities like going to the gym, or certain behaviors like whining. And once we have figured out what we don't like, what do we usually do? We avoid it, right? We stay away from it whether we've even tried it or not. Well, when David and I were first married, we discovered, like most married couples do, that there were some things that he liked and I didn't, and some things that I liked and he didn't. And they weren't always the same things. For example, back then, I liked liver. David, not so much. And I didn't like certain vegetables, like Brussels sprouts and asparagus. But David did. Well, one night when it was his turn to cook dinner, David made Brussels sprouts, even though I'd already told him that I did not like them. I didn't like the way they looked. After all, they're green. Nobody should eat green food, right? And I sure didn't like the way they smelled, especially when they were cooking. Oh, even Ryan is nodding his head. So as I sat down to dinner with David, I said to him, I don't like Brussels sprouts, right? Then he asked the question. You know the question I mean, right? The one that we ask our kids whenever they say that they don't like something. Yeah, the dreaded question, have you ever tried them? Well, like George Washington, I could not tell a lie. I had never tried Brussels sprouts. So reluctantly, I agreed to give them a try. And you know what happened? I liked them, in spite of the smell. And you know what? I still do like Brussels sprouts. Now, I bet there are a lot of things that we don't like that we just might like if we would just give them a try. And that's what the story Green Eggs and Ham is all about. That's what it's trying to teach us and our children, that through the character Sam I Am, that we ought to try things before we say we don't like them. Now, Sam I Am is an annoying little character, kind of like the Cat in the Hat that we heard about last week. But he's annoying because he is persistent. He won't let his nameless friend off the hook. He knows deep down that what he has for his friend, that his friend will like it if he would just simply give it a try. And you know, if you've ever felt strongly about something, then you know how Sam I Am felt. Because when you feel strongly about something, whether it's a type of food or a particular way of life, you want others to feel the same way that you do about it, right? So what are some of the things that you feel strongly about? Maybe you feel strongly about certain social issues like fair immigration policies, equal rights, equal pay, marriage equality, or our children's education, or the ethical treatment of animals. Maybe the things you feel strongly about are more personal, like having a spotless house, not me, or eating a well-balanced diet, or exercising every day. Maybe the things that you feel strongly about have to do with your faith or your church. You know, I've heard a lot of people from this church in the year that I have been here that they love this church. I've heard how much you love this church, how friendly we all are, and how you like the fact that we are involved in so many mission projects. I think it's safe to say that those of us who are members or regular attenders really love this church. We feel strongly about our church. So strongly, in fact, that we just don't understand why the people out there in this community aren't beating down the doors to get in. We don't get it. But we also know that getting folks to come to church, even a great church like ours, isn't easy. We talked about this during the Go Fish series about a month or so back. It takes more than simply standing at the door and welcoming new folks and hoping that they will come inside. It takes a personal invitation, saying to them, hey, come to church with me. I'll pick you up so we can go together. You know, we know all these things, right? But when did you last take the time to step out of your comfort zone and have a conversation with someone about your faith or about your church? When did you last talk to a neighbor or a coworker or a friend about those things? When was the last time you told someone about your relationship with Christ and how it has changed your life? When did you last invite an unchurched friend to come to worship with you on Sunday? And you know I don't mean just inviting them and then being okay with their response, oh yeah, I'll meet you there. No, when was the last time that you were like Sam I Am? When were you persistent in sharing your faith and your church and bringing someone with you to church? When it comes to sharing our faith, my friends, we are called by God to be persistent. We are called by God to be invitational, sometimes over and over again. We are called to invite the folks we know and bring them to worship or to our study groups or to our fellowship opportunities. We are called to ask others to participate with us in our service opportunities, like the ones yesterday or even the ones that are coming up next month. Even our young people are called to invite their friends to our youth group meetings and activities. You know, just like the prophets of old who were called by God to deliver God's message to the people of Israel, we are called to be persistent in sharing our faith with others, whether they're family, friends, or even strangers. Last Sunday, we heard a small portion of the message that the prophet Isaiah shared with the kingdom of Judah before the Babylonians invaded their space. Isaiah's words were a warning to God's people Israel, and they were words that were very hard for them to digest. He said to them, "Clean up your act or bad stuff is going to happen." But the Israelites didn't clean up their act, did they? And bad stuff did happen. The nation was invaded by their enemies, first the Assyrians and then the Babylonians. The temple was destroyed and the people were taken away far from their homes. Then came Ezekiel, Buzi's son. Now, Ezekiel was a priest who was living with the people in exile. And in a remarkable vision, which we heard Melanie share with us today, Ezekiel is commissioned by God to speak on behalf of God, to speak to the people of Israel who were living in exile, people who, according to God, were traitorous and rebellious and therefore unlikely to listen. But God tells Ezekiel to speak to them anyway, even though what he had to tell them was going to be hard to digest. When have you had someone tell you something that you didn't want to hear? It happened to me when I was in seminary. I was taking a preaching class, and for my final exam, I had to deliver a sermon during a worship service. Well, I contacted my pastor at the time and asked if I could preach there, and the pastor said yes, I could. Now, I really wanted that sermon to be good. Not only because it was my final exam, but because I would be preaching in front of a group of people, a church, that had supported me and walked with me along my journey through the candidacy process in order to become a pastor. And to be honest, I really thought that sermon was good. Really good. One of my best. I was wrong. You see, part of the assignment was to ask several people to provide written comments about my sermon, comments that would not only be given to me, but also would be given to my professor. Now, some of the feedback I received was quite positive, but the comments from my pastor, that was another story. Now, to be fair, that pastor did not rip the sermon completely apart, but some of the comments that were made did not make me very happy. Some of the things that pastor wrote, my pastor, were really hard for me to hear. But you know what else? My pastor was right. That sermon had many flaws. I mean, many flaws. So that pastor's feedback was what I needed to hear, and it ultimately helped me to become a better preacher. Now, it took a while, but once I understood that my pastor had my best interests at heart, I was able to accept that feedback for what it was. Constructive criticism from someone who was not only an experienced preacher who I respect, but who wanted me to succeed as a preacher in my own right. And that realization made it so much easier to digest the words that I did not want to hear. And Ezekiel's message to the Israelites was just like that. It was words they needed to hear, but that were hard for them to digest. And in the end, that message that Ezekiel delivered was indeed a message that offered them hope. Hope that things could get better if they simply opened their hearts and allowed their hearts to be changed. In the vision of the dry bones, God presented Ezekiel with an object lesson. The bones represented the people of Israel whose faith had dried up because they had given up all hope. God asks Ezekiel, "Do you think these bones can live again?" And Ezekiel says to God what we probably have said many times: "God, only you know the answer to that." So God says to Ezekiel, speak to the bones and I will give you the words to say. All you got to do is say them. So Ezekiel speaks to the bones, and much to his dismay, the bones begin to move. They begin to come together to create a human form. Then the muscles and the ligaments and the skin start to appear, but they are still lifeless because they have no breath. So God says to Ezekiel, keep talking to the bones. Keep talking. So Ezekiel does. And through Ezekiel's words, God breathes new life into those lifeless bodies. God's people who were once dried up old bones are brought to life again. My friends, as God's chosen people, we too are called by God to speak to God's people and deliver a message that for some might be hard to digest. We are called to be persistent and keep talking until they realize that not only is the message a promise of hope for a better life, but that we also have their best interests at heart. We want them to know what it's like to be in relationship with Jesus Christ, and that relationship will transform our human existence. Friends, we are called by God to share the good news, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That's our mission as believers and as United Methodists. And one way that we do that is by being persistent, just like the prophets, just like Jesus, and just like Sam I Am. Friends, the theological meaning behind green eggs and ham is clear. We have a product that people need and want, a relationship with God through our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. But just like Sam I Am, we have to get them to try it. And we might just have to be a little persistent without being annoying in order to get them to do it. We cannot be content with the old school notion that new people are simply going to just walk through the doors of our church. We can't just say we want more people to join our church and then do nothing to get them here. We must let folks know that we have something they need, something they will like if they'll just give it a try. Throughout the book Green Eggs and Ham, Sam I Am is persistent about getting his friend to try his delicious dish until finally, after a whole lot of prodding, his friend gives in to Sam. And after taking that first reluctant bite, you see that on his face, don't you? Do you know what happens? Well, I think I'd like Dr. Seuss to tell us. Say, I like green eggs and ham. I do. I like them, Sam I Am. And I would eat them in a boat, and I would eat them with a goat. And I will eat them in the rain and in the dark and on a train and in a car and in a tree. They are so good, you see. So I will eat them in a box and I will eat them with a fox. I will eat them in a house and I will eat them with a mouse. And I will eat them here and there. Say, I will eat them anywhere. I do so like green eggs and ham. Thank you, Sam I Am. At the end of the story, Sam I Am's friend changes his mind. He changes his heart. He changes his opinion about green eggs and ham. But it took persistence on the part of Sam I Am. He had to keep talking in order to get his friends to try it so that he would eventually like it. And while that may not have been uncomfortable for Sam I Am, I know that for some of us, talking to our friends about our faith can be uncomfortable. But if our church is going to grow, if the realm of God is going to grow, then we need to step out of our comfort zones and do something that, even though it makes us uncomfortable, will bring new life to someone we know and love. So, as we conclude today's message, I'd like you to consider just a few questions. How can I be persistent without being annoying and help someone experience a relationship with Christ? What can I do differently to share my church with someone I know? What can I do to bring another family into the life of this church? What can I do to offer hope to the hopeless? How can I step out of my comfort zone to bring someone closer to God? And what changes do I need to make in my heart that will lead to bringing someone else to Christ? As we consider these questions, let us join together and once again sing, "Change My Heart, O God."